Welcome to the 100X Life Podcast, where we activate people who desire to live the words of Jesus and experience the abundant life he promises. I'm your host, Rob Dayton, and I hope this podcast inspires you to put in the work of following Jesus.
Now the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, to bind up the brokenhearted and set the captives free.
Hey, 100X Life, welcome to the podcast. We are on day 33 on the down slope. Here we go. Word of Jesus, number 27. Love your enemies. And I got to say, I am really excited by this word. This one, I think, I got to tell you, it's got so much freedom in it. This word contains your freedom. And I got Jonathan Branoff on the line to help us talk it through. Jonathan is a dear brother from the San Luis Obispo community, and his wife, Ashley, very dear. Actually, they're going to be at our house tonight, which is pretty awesome. And, he's been in the master's program, and we've had some really cool journeys together. My favorite is our trip on the Road River together. And I've been very excited about your development, your spiritual maturity, and the way that you've really connected with the Trinity in a way that I think is transformative. I hope we get to talk about that too. But before we begin, Jonathan, what do we need to know about you? What's your jam? What are you doing? Tell us about your life.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me on. So my name is Jonathan Branoff. I'm originally from Michigan, born and raised there. And then about 5 years ago, I had a work opportunity that brought me to the Central Coast. So moved out here 5 years ago with my wife, Ashley, who Rob adores.
Yes, I
as
do.
do I, of course. And then our two kids. So my son, Leo, is about to be 10 this coming week. And my daughter, Vivian, is 12 and a half. And we've, really, really found a nice place to land here in SLO and are loving it. My background, I grew up in the Greek Orthodox Church.
I was hoping you would mention that.
Love to talk. It was a beautiful experience, and really learned about the beauty and the value of reverence and tradition, and the power of God and community and all those things. And as I got older, I kind of stopped going to church as much, just because it felt like more of like a family thing that I did as a kid. And then when I moved out of the house, I kind of just stopped going. And as I got older and got married, and then we had kids, it kind of started feeling tugged, I should really reconsider not going to church anymore. We should start going again. And for the first time in my life, I was like, I should probably look into what this whole thing is really about. What's it rooted in? What's the history? Is it defendable? Is it true? And I really went into a deep dive in studying apologetics. And my background's in finance. I'm kind of a math and spreadsheet guy. So things kind of have to make sense to me to really buy in. And as I went down this rabbit hole of just studying the history and the philosophy and the logical arguments and the scientific arguments, I really came to just recognize and see that it was true, which for me was everything, right? Because I couldn't fake it. But it took me a while to make that connection of intellectually, academically recognizing it as truth, to have it kind of hold down into my heart and transform my life in a real way. Take it from being head knowledge to more of a heart knowledge too. And really, I had kind of a pretty cool experience it'll be 5 years ago on June 30th. So June 30th, 2020, I was praying to God, and he kind of knocked me over. I prayed for a sign, and he gave me a literal sign. So anyways, that's another story, but been on this journey ever since. Jumped into TMP pretty much immediately after that. And it's,
I got to stop you, man. Okay, what happened? Give us more detail on that moment. That's too good to pass up.
Yeah, happy to. So I was in northern Michigan during the summer, and we had moved here the day after Christmas 2019. So across 2,000 miles from anybody we knew, all of our families back in the Midwest. And 2 months later, COVID happens. And then a lot of the George Floyd things happened, and then just social unrest, work economies going crazy, and we're kind of we're alone on the other side of the country. And I'm thinking, what have I done to my family? What is this right? And then again, kind of started to try to root myself back in reading the Bible. Like, what's God have to say about this? And started listening to some podcasts from some local churches. And there was one in particular that I started kind of being drawn towards, called Slow City Church, where we go now. And so I was back in Michigan visiting family that summer, and I was about to go on a jog and was turning on that week's sermon. And I prayed to God. I said, God, if you can hear me, I would love to get a sign from you that, you're here. Right. And so I'm on the jog. The sermon is about happiness and joy. And the moment the conversation or the sermon switched over to joy, like the first time he said the word joy in that context, I was in front of a house that had a 3 or 4 foot tall sign that said joy in huge letters in the middle of the summer. Maybe if it was Christmas, you could write that off. But for me, at first I was like, wow, that's weird. And then I went to the end of the block, and then it really sunk in on me. I was like, man, I asked for a sign and I got a sign. And,
you got a literal sign.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was the moment that's when I got down on my knees and gave my life back over to Jesus. So ever since then, it's just been, chasing God and trying to be around guys like you and other TMP brothers, and just really trying to soak it up.
Yeah, it's so cool. Thank you for sharing that moment. And let me ask you some questions about it. So you saw the sign, but what was the emotional response? How would you describe that was going inside you?
Yeah, I think it was the first moment I can remember being like spoken to. I guess, like, you pray and you hope to hear back, or maybe you don't know how to receive his word because you're not, I don't know the word right way to describe that. But anyways, I reached out to God and he answered, right? So it felt very close. Like he felt near and present, and like he was available to me. And
did you feel loved in that moment?
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
Like he was loving you? That's why I kind of asked, because I love interviewing and asking people, okay, so you had this encounter. What did it feel like? Give me a description. And what people say, and this is my experience, is that every time you feel God speaking to you, it's always laced with his love. And you feel loved, you feel wanted, you feel alive. There's lots of other descriptors that go with that, but it's the feeling of love, and it's an obvious transaction that's happened between you and God, and that's how you would describe your experience.
Yeah, very much.
So cool. I love that. And tell us about, that was a while ago.
Yeah.
And now you've grown some moniker of amount in terms of hearing God's voice. You've done the 100X Life Challenge. You've gotten in the habit of doing some journaling. Do you feel like now it's God's less elusive and more present?
Oh, totally. Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Yeah. I feel like he's available all the time. And usually when he feels distant is when I haven't been, reading the scriptures, or haven't been journaling, or haven't been praying. And it's usually like, oh yeah, I need to, God feels like he's far away because I haven't tried to connect with him lately.
It's such a good point, because I think that we miss this point, or it's easy to miss, or we can be tempted to miss it, is that if we're feeling distant from God, it's probably on us. His presence is so unbelievably constant. In fact, it kind of reminds me of a prayer that I hear in church all the time. And it kind of drives me crazy when people say, be with Susie, God be with Susie, God be with, Bobby. And I'm like, that's a prayer of disbelief in what God has already said is true. And so my little hack for that one is, when I have doubts, I just say, okay, let me just quiet my spirit here, and you can show me your presence. And 100%, I feel something, or like in your case, get a sign.
Yeah.
Maybe not a literal sign, but I love the literal sign. I think that's really, really cool. Okay. And let's see. So, and you're in finance. So you and my wife are kind of in the same numbers lane. And I love people who kind of want to know the proof of things. I like your story about, before I jumped in, I kind of wanted to know if this is real. Tell us about your journey in discovering God is real.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I mean, I think I read a lot, listened to a lot of audiobooks, William Lane Craig, Sean McDowell, Lee Strobel, all those guys. And I think, growing up in a lot of college towns, right? East Lansing, where Michigan State University is, and then Ann Arbor, where University of Michigan is, and now in SLO, where Cal Poly is, you're surrounded by a lot of, academic-minded people. And I don't know if it was them or me, but it felt like the perception was if you had faith, maybe you just weren't very smart, you hadn't really thought it through. And that was like something that I needed to overcome, right? And then so I'm doing the research and I find out, all of the scientific arguments really for the beginning of the universe, right? There was a beginning, there was a big bang, there had to be a big banger, right?
Right.
Someone had to create everything that was outside of time and space. You think through the moral argument for the existence of God, design, everything, points to God. And then, okay, I wrap my mind around God's probably real, because it would be crazy if he weren't, because none of this could have happened. And then you're like, all right, well, how can I get to know God better? Well, God revealed himself through Jesus. Was Jesus real? Did Jesus actually live? Did he actually walk the earth? And then you study the history, and there's more support for the existence of Jesus than anyone by far at any time throughout all of history. Like, okay, well, is that all just New Testament writing? Well, no. It was written historically through Jews, through Romans, through non-believers. So there is unequivocal evidence that Jesus Christ was real, and that the early followers believed that he was the Lord. So then you jump in, all right, well, if Jesus was real and he really shook up the world the way that everyone believes that he did, can I trust the Bible? How do I know what the Bible is true? And then you dive into that. Well, what is the Bible? The Bible is a collection of many letters and books written over a long period of time, carefully transcribed, spread throughout the world. And all those transcripts, from the Middle East to Europe to Africa, they all match, and they were all distributed quickly. So it couldn't have possibly been some collusion to trick people. So anyways, you're like, wow, this is all very, very true. I can't disprove it.
Yeah, it is. It's really cool how you come from you're just coming from an academic standpoint and seeing, if you're smart, that is kind of the university culture is if you believe in Jesus, you're not smart, but then completely proved it out. And it is profound just how intact the scriptures are and how close they were written to the actual events and the people involved. Okay, that's really cool. And then that kind of brings us to this word of Jesus, number 27. Love your enemies. Let's get into this. I'm just going to read the scripture.
Yeah.
And this is the first one. It's not the first time it's happened in Matthew, but this is the first time that we're reading it kind of in the headlines of 100X Life about rewards. And what are rewards, and what does that look like? And if you haven't been a person who, thinks about God as a rewarder, let me just say there's 3 motivations in the Bible: fear, love, and reward. And God has chosen to use reward twice as much as the other 2 combined. So reward is a big deal with God. And so let's look at this. Love your enemies. This is the upside down kingdom. This is from, let's see, I'm in Matthew 5:40 through 42. This is the NIV. You have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. And where they got that from the old covenant. So he's clarifying again. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you might be children of your Father in heaven. He causes the sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? And if you greet only your own people, what are you doing more than others? Do not even pagans do that? So right off the bat, Wow, a lot of information that Jesus is clarifying for the Jewish mindset. And of course, I would just say it still works for the American mindset. Jonathan, what are your thoughts? Is you're hearing that again as we're talking about this.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to Jesus was a genius, right? Like, so countercultural, everything that he taught. And you think about, like, man, loving your enemies. Like, why would I want to do that? How could I do that? And then, well, what's the goal? The goal isn't to not have enemies, right? So to convert enemies to friends, and by hating someone or by treating them poorly doesn't mean don't speak truth to them, truth and love, because that's important. But it doesn't mean, to escalate and create fight. Like, to bless them, right? I remember MLK Day was the other week, and I heard something about, it was a story of how he woke up one morning and there was, an attack on his home, and there was a burning cross, and the news was there. His first reaction was to pray to bless those people that had just attacked his home. And it's like, that's what Jesus taught, man. And that's how you change hearts, right? Because if you hate on an enemy, they're going to stay your enemy, and they're going to just send it back to you. And then it's going to grow something dark inside of you. Right. So I don't know. I just think for me, it's really been like, how can I be more like Jesus, and how can I respond more like Jesus did?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think it's important for us to talk about what does that mean to love your enemies? And because, what we're always chasing in 100X Life is we want to know, how do I practically follow Jesus in his instruction? So loving your enemies must look like something. That is a verb. that love looks like something. It's not a noun. It's a verb. It's something you do, and something this can be a noun, but if it's not an action, it's not love. So what does it mean to love your enemies? What's your initial perspective of that? Like, what are the actions? And you mentioned blessing them, which is right on.
Yeah, I think for me, the initial reaction is like, practically just slow down, right? Try not to react quickly, and to remember that revenge is for God, not for me.
Mm-hmm.
And just kind of recenter myself in moments that get heated.
I think that's great. That's super practical. And let me unpack that. What you're saying, I believe, is that when you're in a situation and you're definitely encountering someone who's coming against you, maybe we should define enemy too. You're saying to yourself, the story you're telling yourself is that, hey, God's got this one from a vengeance standpoint. I like to say they're probably already being tortured significantly by the enemy, or self-tortured because they don't have unforgiveness, and that's why they're conducting behavior that looks like it's coming against me. So you're telling yourself a story in real time, and I think you can get really good at this, so that your unconscious mind knows we're not going to respond in kind. In other words, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. We're not going to respond in kind. We're going to respond kindly, and we're going to see them and tell ourselves a really good story about, hey, it's really a bummer that they're in this situation. Maybe it's also an eternal perspective that this fight is not against right now. It's just against your whole life and existence, and I'm going to love the hell out of you right here. How would you describe, so that's one way, tell yourself a story. Is there anything else about maybe some actions, maybe even a situation where you loved your enemies and what you actually did?
Oh man. I was thinking about people that come to mind, and I can't really think of a whole lot of enemies that I've had to experience personally. Obviously you have, confrontations, or you have moments that are challenging, or you have people that are difficult, and you navigate that. But I don't really have an enemy list. And honestly, like, I think more about maybe who thinks I'm their enemy, and, like, who I may be wrong that I need to reach out to and ask for forgiveness. I don't know that. I know that's not your question, but yeah, that's my answer.
No, I think that's good. I think that's another practical point is just to think of it that way. What I think about is, and I think that this round of 100x Life has really helped me, is to really get clarity on the aspects of love are living the words of Jesus. So you can kind of see, and I want to get your opinion on this. You can kind of see if he says love your enemies. Okay, so what is love? Okay, it's forgiveness. It's non-judgmentalness. It's I'm not going to condemn. It's I'm not going to resist an evil person. I'm going to bless. I'm trying to think of some of the other ones in there that are so other. I'm going to go the extra mile. I'm going to settle matters quickly, even though it's apparent to me that you could be categorized as an enemy. I'm going to, I think blessing, there's so many different ways to bless your enemies, and some people do that in a way that's the enemy can see it, and others just do it in such a way that they're blessing the person without them knowing it. I can think of so many stories of that. But does that sound right to you? That loving your enemies is also the love action is doing the other words of Jesus towards your enemies.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, because I mean, you think about it too, like Jesus died for everyone, right? Even the people that I don't like, so I don't have the right to hate them because, I was saved just like they were if they step into it. So I don't know. I mean, it's a challenging word, but I just try to kind of keep going back to, Jesus. I was distant from God. Jesus died for me. It's not my place to have enemies like.
That's good. That thought that, Jesus died for every single person on planet Earth, even the one I'm in front of right now, who is pissing me off. that person, God, Jesus, you paid for their life and they're an image bearer. So I love that perspective as a kind of a doorway to get us to love. I think that's super effective. Let's talk about this whole idea of becoming, the practice of being children of the Father in heaven through loving your enemies. Do you have any insights into that?
Man, that's a deep question. I think for me, it just keeps coming back to follow Jesus, read his teachings, try to emulate him, try to be like him, and think about how would he respond in that situation.
What is it? WWJD. Yeah, I mean, 100x Life is WWJD, right?
Yeah.
That's right. And I appreciate that. And I like to think too, also, like, how many really want to be his kids? Like, I want to be his kid. I want to be the guy that he's proud of and says, that's my boy. And this passage, Jesus is giving us a pathway to experiencing being an offspring of God. I think it, to me, what I think about, Jonathan, when I hear your thoughts, is that if I'm a kid, if I'm one of his kids and I'm created in his image so I can be like him, I'm thinking, okay, well, how is Jesus going to respond to an enemy? And I feel like I've got an arsenal of really good things that I can draw from that show that I'm not to hate them, I'm to love them, I'm to actually give them favor. We like to say on 100x Life that grace is the operating system of love. And grace is that thing where you give power, authority, blessing to the one who does not deserve it or is not in a position to receive it because of their own merits. It feels to me like grace is really in full display in this word, love your enemies.
No, I agree. And I think to your point too, it's like if we're children of God, right, we're supposed to reflect his qualities, right? And it's stepping into that and claiming your identity and living it out, right? So it's, we fall short, but we try to make it to that level. We'll never make it, but we can keep growing in that direction. So yeah.
I think that's a great point. I think we keep growing in that direction. And my experience in life is that if you feel like you've arrived, then you're starting to be deceived because it just keeps getting better. There's more of Jesus to embody. There's more of Holy Spirit to connect with in every moment. And I love that part about life and adventure with Jesus is that it just keeps getting better. Tell me, Jonathan, your thoughts on this rewards thing. Like, why do you think Jesus is bringing this up in this particular passage? Do you have any insights for us on that?
Man, loving your enemies is a hard thing to do, right? So I think it's a motivator, right? To have a reward. And, honestly, like through your leadership and teachings too, it's like, I've come to recognize that the reward is being with God and being, close to him. So if my behavior is acting like Jesus and, being close with the Father and the Holy Spirit, like that's a reward. Obviously there's eternal rewards that await in heaven, but I think right now my focus has just been on trying to go closer to God.
I love that. So good. And, rewards, he doesn't say actually in the scripture where the reward is coming. In other words, in other places, he says a reward in heaven. And then other places he says that you'll be rewarded in heaven and also here. I think it's a good perspective to just think of it as both because that's more motivating. And again, I think it's really important for us to talk about and to reflect that Jesus appeals to our self-interest. I think we have a self-interest for a reason. Like, for instance, we want to survive. We want to have a good life. We want to be close to God. I mean, these self-interested behaviors are really good that are hardwired into our DNA and the way we think. And then Jesus is saying, like my favorite example is it's better for you to give than to receive, which means he's just saying, hey, do you want the best? You want to be the leader of all, be the servant of all. He doesn't condemn the process of wanting to be the best. He gives us the pathway. And I think love your enemies is one of those pathways to greatness. It's one of those pathways to, how many people don't want to be known as a child of God? Like we just talked about, people who have been with you note that you've also been with Jesus because his scent is on you. His actions are on you. And I think that love your enemies is one of the probably most practical, best pathways to actually experiencing all this, and reward is the gravy. So Jonathan, I wanted to tell you about, so we're all on Telegram, and I saw someone's Telegram post and they were talking about, oh my gosh, my friends have totally come against me and they're speaking vile against me and I can't reason with them. And I feel like it's an attack of the enemy. And I kind of wanted to, and I did send this person a DM and encourage them, but my response was, well, of course we're reading the word to be, and that you're now in the gym. You just entered the gym, right? So they're in the gym and I'm like, don't be surprised about this, because some people on the channel were reacting to him and saying, bless you, praying for you, all really good. But the best response in the church is, how are you going to stay free? How are you going to forgive? How are you going to not condemn? And then I would say, and this has been my jam that I think works the best for me, is what's my role in this situation? What did I do? Did I do something did I step in it some way? Did I say something the wrong way? Because what's true about all of us is we all have a blind spot, and a blind spot is what everyone knows about us but us. Mm-hmm. And you, Jonathan and I, we have blind spots. Just ask our wives. And so there's probably some role. So I love to look for my role in the reason someone's coming against me and immediately settle matters quickly, immediately say, hey, you know what? I think that this might have been my role in this, and I'm really sorry. Will you please forgive me? I'll give you an example. So had this So in our house, our house has 40 doors, as you know, you've been here, and it's got a lot of doors. And these doors, I had them designed. They're my design. I had them built, constructed in Santa Barbara. And the maker of the doors, wonderful man, a great skill in carpentry. I paid for all the doors in advance, but you know how construction projects are, Jonathan. Like, if the doors don't show up, you're at a standstill, and the doors were not showing up. And we're ready for the doors. And I'd call him and he wouldn't produce them. And I'm like thinking, when am I going to get these doors? And months are going by. So I decided to drive over to his shop and confront him. And in that scene, he gave another excuse and I exploded. I was condemning. I was judgmental. I was not walking in forgiveness. And then I drove away, and it only took about 5 blocks, 6 blocks. And I thought, oh gosh, you stepped in it, Rob. You really stepped in it. And I went back, and I'm in tears, and I'm saying to this guy, let's just call him John. I'm like, John, I am so sorry. I'm thinking he's an image bearer. I'm thinking, God, there's my connection with him cannot be lost because of his actions. And I said, and I'm really sorry for raising my voice. That was wrong of me. I'm asking you to forgive me. Didn't even mention the doors again, just focused on my poor behavior. And then walked away. Lo and behold, I had the doors in the next week. But so I think that there's a power there. Obviously, I was rewarded for my behavior in the present time as well. And that also John was seeing that I had grace in the face of the wrong. In other words, I was willing to cop for the little thing I did when he's been holding off on completing my doors with all the money in hand. I think that's the power of transformation. So, my advice to people who feel like they're under attack, and we're doing the words of Jesus, the enemy's going to come on account of the word, is that's what Jesus says. And you're going to have the opportunity to forgive. So when it comes, first thing I would say, be joyful. Oh my gosh, the gym has arrived. And that you kind of have to fake it till you make it, is my experience. And then, it can be painful, but we're focused on, how do I reconcile with this person? What's my role in the reason we're in a disagreement? And then I like what you said, is continually blessing them along the way. I like the phrase, how do we make this right? And again, I think it's really important to point out that it has nothing to do with the scoreboard. In other words, the scoreboard can be, 1,700 penalties on their side, 3 on ours. You still got to deal with the 3 on your side first, and make sure you're clean and being held harmless, and you're coming with an active love. Jonathan, what thoughts as you're hearing me describe this testimony?
Yeah, I'm thinking about your prior question too about rewards, and I'm thinking about that when what you were feeling right when you first left, anger, probably high blood pressure. You're probably on a path to have a really bad rest of your day, not much peace. But by forgiving him, by not holding a grudge against that person and releasing him from that, it changed you, right? And it probably wasn't the reward you were looking for or expecting, but there's peace and contentment and joy. I know that's a word we like to use, that comes through that, and that's a reward as well. So I don't know. That's just what I was thinking is, maybe that reward was the way that it changed how your day was going, how you're feeling in that moment. And now you can experience life in a better way that was more in alignment with what God wants for you.
That's 100%. I love that you see that. And it's absolutely true. My day could have been a cluster, when we get to the end of the day and we say, I had a bad day. Mm-hmm. That did not happen that day. Yeah. It was definitely freeing to go back and deal, in this case, quickly with stepping in it. That was freedom. That does start to bring joy in your own life. So again, I think, and that's like you're saying, and that is a reward in and of itself, because you pointed out high blood pressure, cortisol is pumping through my body, which is really bad for the body because I'm not running. I'm not in a sport. I'm just angry. And our anger and our vile against our enemies is actually coming against us to rob us of peace. That's a really good point. And then I'll just also say, and maybe get your thoughts on this, is that I feel like the most effective way to destroy the demonic is with this love your enemies. Like in particular, an enemy, and this is common, has a demonic influence behind them. It doesn't mean they're demon possessed. It means they're demon influenced, and the enemy's pummeling them just like he's trying to pummel you. The self-talk is just full tilt awful, and they're in this bad behavior because of the hurt they've experienced, probably to themselves. And the enemy is trying to leverage that further by coming after you, body of Christ. And then we destroy the works by coming in answer to that with love, because love casts out all fear. Love is so effective to melt away those hurts. And just like when you received the sign of joy on that walk, listening to that podcast, that becomes a signpost of love for them. And I think that if you are demonstrating that you're a child of God, it's going to be a scent of love that's powerful, and it destroys the enemy. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think too, that door maker, right? How many people did he treat differently the rest of that day, right? He received grace, so he probably felt inclined to extend it, right? That's a natural thing. For you, leaving that experience the first time all heated up and angry, you were probably in a position where you were going to go hurt some people unintentionally and then, perpetuate this cycle of creating enemies. And that was destroyed, right? And that's what God wants, break that down.
So beautiful. And when you say that, I see the picture of what you're saying from the 100X life or the 100X Jesus process, is that I'm going to show you what the seeds of loving my enemies looks like. I'm going to show you the fruit of it. So I go and show him the fruit of it. And then I think you're right. I think that it does transform people's hearts. I think that they do see that is brilliant, that is love, that it's attractive, that it's a desired talent or a desired skill to love in the face of in this case, someone who's probably not conscientious of schedule and workflow and all these things. And you're right. He's probably done this to lots of customers. I'm probably not the first one. And so he's seen one of his customers in a problem. We're pretty self-aware of our shortfalls in that area. And then he's seen someone love in the face of that. I think it does change your day. I think you're totally right about that. Any more thoughts about the process of loving your enemies that come to mind, or how maybe you've been able to do that?
Yeah, I think it just comes back to trying to slow down, try to be unoffendable. I've heard that term used quite a bit, and it's easier said than done, right? But I think if that's one of the goals, is to kind of just let the insults slide off. And I've got a lot of work to do personally in that area, but I'm trying. I think you'd be better positioned to handle these situations if you don't lean into your pride and lean more into God. Yeah, and then there's also another saying too that I think about too. It's like hurt people, right? You've probably heard that before.
That's good.
And that's just a downward negative spiral that can't be broken unless you change the model, do the paradigm shift that Jesus teaches, which is to not respond with hate, but to respond with love. And that's the only way to keep it from going downward.
So that's so good. That's relevant. That's practical. And I would say it's good advice for ourselves. If hurt people, we can see that, as you're expressing, in the people we're dealing with. Oh, they must be hurt. Father, forgive them, for they don't know not what they do. Borrowing some words from Jesus, his story that he's telling himself about those people. And then also, great question for ourselves. if I am coming against someone, where is it that I've been hurt in my own life? What am I remanifesting that the enemy has wreaked havoc in my own life? And then making a decision, let's try to destroy that now. And then you referenced my behavior about coming back to that guy. And I got to say, that's kind of in the middle point of my journey in this 100X life process. And I can see the pattern of kind of waking up in my anger and seeing, oh, this is the wrong path. This is not the one I want to be on. And I want that to be hopeful for us all, because it is a progression. It's a complete progression. So at that stage of my life, it took 6 blocks for me to wake up, right? And then if you go a little bit further, maybe it took 2 blocks of driving away from a situation to realize, I did it again. And then what happens is, and this is the good news, is eventually you're having a conscientious thought in the middle of the episode of the behavior you want. That's how the mind transforms. And then you get on the other side of it, and then you get that thing that you mentioned, the unoffendable heart, where you're actually placing in front of you forgiveness so that it can't hurt you, because you're telling yourself this amazing story about people in the face of them coming against you. Wow, that's super rich. I can't help but just note the story in the book. And this comes from the colleague there is Graham Cook, who's a friend of mine. He actually lives in Santa Barbara. And it's this beautiful story of this woman who was gang raped in India. And one of the people who raped her had this deformity on his face. And the girl that was being raped was in love with Jesus, had been practicing things in Jesus. And she really had cultivated a heart of love in the face of enemies. And so in this particular case, instead of thinking about herself and the pain, and I'm sure it was just awful, we weren't there, we don't know exactly how it goes down, but she reaches up and touches the scarring on his face, and he's completely healed. So as he's raping her, she's reaching up to his face and asking God to heal that. I cannot help but put that story in there, because that story really blows me away. Like, how about you? What are the thoughts that you have even hearing the story?
I mean, it's upsetting. Obviously, it's tragic. It makes you, man, it makes you think about like the state of the world. Like, how could people behave that way? And then for the woman, I mean, my goodness, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, that's an incredible way to respond in a situation like that, and it's hard to even wrap your mind around it. And then I think also in your book you go on to mention that we know that story because that man, didn't he become a pastor or something?
I don't know about pastor, but definitely became a Christian.
Okay, that's right.
Maybe became a pastor. What a testimony.
Yeah, because the scarring on his face was healed while he was committing that terrible act, and it changed his life.
And I'll say it destroyed the enemy, destroyed the works of the enemy. And Jesus's role on planet Earth, there's 3 places where it's explicit that he is here to destroy the works of the enemy, and that is our job too. Love your enemies is the way to destroy the darkness in someone. That is the pathway. Loving in the face of people really genuinely coming against you to hurt you. I'm not saying, please don't hear me like, stay in the suffering, stay in being physically abused. I think we want to try to get out of that. We want to get away from that and protect ourselves, particularly protecting our family. But if you're ever in that situation where you are being violated, what is my role here, Holy Spirit? What are you assigning me in this moment to break and destroy the works of the enemy is a really good question. And then I'll just say a parallel to her story in the Bible would be Stephen. I mean, Jesus is an obvious one, but Stephen was the first martyr before the Sanhedrin, and he's forgiving them as they're stoning him. And I just wonder, Jonathan, what's your thoughts? Like, these 2 people are probably some of the all-stars in heaven. Like, they're the people who got the most reward. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Oh, man. I don't know. It's a, it's something to aspire to be able to respond in the face of such a terrible condition with such love and grace. And it's hard to, first of all, it's hard to even comprehend what it must be like to be in a position like that. And then if you are, to be able to react like they did, I mean, it's superhero type stuff. And, you know,
Yeah, because she did die of that. So, so she wasn't around to tell the story. Only he was. Yeah. Awful. And then also maybe the thing we're dealing with our enemy isn't so bad, right?
yeah. And you put it in that comparison, it's not.
And what's really interesting is we're in this, I don't know what we call a first world developed nation. It's so easy to become lulled versus some of the enemies way in your face in other developing nations, being lulled that there's not an enemy that we're actually destroying, and we get confused at who is our enemy. It's not the image bearer in front of you. Okay, so I'll give you the 100x lifestyle. So these are the phrases that you might think about if you're putting this word into practice, which is what we desire. Let me get your response on this, Jonathan. You see your enemies as sons and daughters of a loving Father.
That's the way to do it. I mean, again, it's hard, but if you can stop and slow down and reflect on the forgiveness you've received, and that Jesus loves them as well, that's the right posture to have.
It's almost hard to respond poorly when you have this predominant thought that Jesus loved them so much and paid the price for them, and that they're a son or a daughter of the King. Here's the next one. Your private thoughts about people who come against you are full of understanding and love.
Yeah. Again, I mean, that's the idea, right? That's what we want. That's the way you want to get your heart and your head to react in those situations.
And this is what Jesus is looking for. It's very evident that he wants your whole mind. He wants your brain transformed to be a slave of righteousness. So your thoughts, your private thoughts about people are the thing that you probably will most want to vigilantly guard, that you not have a bad thought. In fact, neurologically, Caroline Leaf's book, Switch on Your Brain, which is a great book, Switch on Your Brain, Caroline Leaf, neurologists are saying that somewhere between 95 and 98% of all disease comes from our thinking and having a bad thought. And I think that is completely biblically proven out in the way Jesus is saying your behavior is going to impact you. So we want to be vigilant about our thoughts. We don't want to have bad thoughts about people. How do we do that? We tell ourselves a good story. The person you're talking to is your unconscious mind, because your unconscious mind is going to be training for that automatic behavior that we want, that slavery to righteousness behavior. So you've got to tell yourself a great story about people, and then it gets really good. Here's when it gets really good, Jonathan, and I want to hear if you have a situation like this, is when someone says, man, I can't believe that person wronged you. I just can't believe they stole from you. I can't believe they did that to you. And then you say in response, yeah, they didn't know what they were doing. Yeah, total child of God. I bless them. And what they stole wasn't mine anyway. I'm just a steward of God's stuff. And he must have had a reason for destroying the enemy through my love in this encounter.
Mm-hmm.
Crazy. Yeah. That's the story we want. I mean, I said it kind of perfectly without any kind of emotional heat going on. But what are your thoughts on that?
No, I think that's it. And I think to your point too, of telling yourself and reminding yourself about who that person is, right? Like, I think that's where journaling also comes into play, is you can kind of intentionally script out, write out who this person is and remind yourself of who they are in the Lord. And there's been times, right, where I've been wronged in business, or felt like I've been mistreated or put in jeopardy. And then I reflect on it and I think about, well, that person probably was coming at it out of a place of desperation, or they felt like they were in a corner or didn't know how else to act. And I try to, like you said, you can forgive quickly, try to make amends quickly. Doesn't mean you have to trust again or right away. But you can release that person and release yourself from that burden. The faster you do it, the better it is.
So good. I love those thoughts. I think that that's right on. And Jonathan, thank you so much for being on the podcast and coming on and talking about this stuff with me. I love you so much. Can't wait to see you tonight, you and Ashley.
Yeah.
And Lifers, we're on the downslope of the challenge. Hang in there and seize the day. Here we go. See you tomorrow.
Thanks.
If you believe in the 100X Life movement, please follow and invite a friend by sharing this podcast. The 100X Life movement can also be found on Instagram and Facebook, and also at 100xlife.com. The 100X Life podcast was produced by Jenna D of Jenna D Services with music by Ryan Ellis.
Was lost, but you found me here, and your fire burns inside. It will not disappear, because the Spirit